Um, Welcome at this third webinar in the Clingendael State of the Union series. My name is Monica C, and I will chair this session. Yesterday, during the opening session with Minister Stef Blok of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands, he pleaded for a balanced approach. And with that, he meant that we have to strengthen European solutions in the face of Europe's poly-crisis, but we also have to make sure that EU member states have their own house in order. And we see that in the field of asylum and migration. We've seen significant strengthening of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency on the one hand, and we see the urgent need for EU member states that previously were not countries of destination in the European Union, that they have to get their asylum system in order because their partial non-implementation of the European rules leads to significant secondary movements of irregular migrants onwards to countries like the Netherlands, Germany, and others in Northern and Western Europe, and to prolonged dramatic situations on the Greek and Italian islands, culminating in the fire in the Moria camp at Lesbos. However, I already announced to the minister that it's more complicated in the migration and asylum field because the context has dramatically changed over the last 10 years. And because of that dramatic change, the system and rulebook does not feel legitimate anymore, no longer functional by many member states. So how can we change these rules in an EU where member states differ in their geographical location, in their capacities, in their political views on asylum, and in a context that has been politicized to a high extent, leading to what Jonathan Seitlin, Laffen, and others have called poly-cleavages in the face of European poly-crisis. And this is why we will address in this session not only the simmering crisis in this field, but also the long-awaited proposal for a new rule book that the European Commission has tabled in September. And we will discuss the internal bargain between EU member states that is strived for with this new Migration and Asylum Pact. And we will discuss the external grand bargain that is necessary between the EU member states and third countries to make this internal deal at all possible. And because of the importance of that external deal, we will delve deeper into what the EU has actually on offer to third countries to engage them into partnerships to better control migration. And I'm privileged to have distinguished guests to discuss these issues. So let me first introduce Hugo Brady. I understood calling in from Vienna. Are you, Hugo? Our thoughts are with you. How are you? How are you doing, Hugo?
Well, I've never been so unprepared for a talk for such a decent reason, which is that we've had a terrible attack here in Vienna in which 5 people are dead and 7 people are fighting for their lives. And the whole incident took place just outside my office. So,
really?
So yeah, it's a sad day here in Vienna, and I have witnessed these attacks in several other cities where I've been at the time, starting to feel a bit personal because when I was in Brussels during the Brussels attacks, my old neighborhood in Paris, the Marais, was attacked, as we all know, in the attack on the Bataclan. And I was in London for the July 2005 attacks, I think it was. So I think it's very important when something like this happens is to absolutely don't give the terrorists what they want, which is to make everybody fearful. You know, usually these are very mixed up kids. The attacker was a Viennese born of Albanian descent who was 20 years of age, you know, obviously far, far too young to understand the consequences of his actions. He's now dead. And the police are pursuing the other attackers. So it's sad, but Vienna will always shine on. We have very like a Rotterdam spirit here, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well said, and thanks for joining nonetheless, because we're so happy to have you on the panel, because you have that very special quality of having been a brilliant think tanker for long, having worked with the Center for European Reform and now with the more action-oriented ICMPD in Vienna, and having worked at the heart, really, of the European system in the cabinet of Donald Tusk, where you have been his Justice and Home Affairs advisor and speechwriter. So happy to have you on the panel. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
And then Nanda, who I admire a lot as well. She has been one of the most knowledgeable and resourceful negotiators in this field, serving at the permanent representation of the Netherlands in Brussels for many years. And she's now working on EU's migration policy for the Dutch Ministry of Justice and Security. Nanda, welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica. Happy to be here and happy to discuss with all the people that I've already known as well for many years. And it would be interesting to discuss indeed this interesting issue, which never has failed to amaze me and keep me busy.
Plus, with 95 people present in the audience that we cannot see, but who are connected through Willemijn Tikstra with us. And Willemijn, she will be my sidekick for this panel. She is a previously bright colleague at the Clingendael Institute, but now moved to the Bureau for International Migration Policy at the Ministry of Justice and Security in the Netherlands. Willemijn, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Monica. Just as Nanda said, happy to be here as well. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and from Mexico, of all places, Camille, thanks for joining us. Camille has done important and very original work in evaluating various aspects of the legal migration policies of the European Union. And with that work has been able to give really concrete advice on how to improve these policies. So great that you could join from the other side of the world, Camille.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Monica. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So Hugo, maybe I can start with you to assess the simmering crisis and context in this field. Maybe first to try to assess what have been the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis on spontaneous arrivals in Europe, and what do you expect in the medium term? Because of course we've seen a mobility crunch, but if we look ahead a little bit to what's happening from Tunisia now, what are your expectations?
I think that people will be surprised at the end of the pandemic, and there will be an end, as to that migration flows into the Union actually remained a little higher than they expected. So the direct impact on, you can think of it in two simple numbers. Over the course of this year, asylum applications in the Union, first instance asylum applications are down by 1/3, and irregular arrivals are down by about 15%, so half that. And one reason for that, as Nanda or anyone else can tell you, is we have a backlog issue in Europe. There are a lot of people living off the grid who arrived in the last migration wave, and they may make seemingly new asylum applications, and that's why we've been getting quite a lot of pressure still from the Western Balkans, actually. Arrivals on the central Mediterranean were sharply down over the summer, and also, notwithstanding the drama at Moria camp and so on, the situation there seems to be getting a little bit better in terms of migratory pressure, because flows have been down there as well. The situation between Turkey and Greece is so complicated, I'm not going to go into it now today, but the flows, the migratory patterns there are changing. There's the land border and the islands, but principally I'm talking about the islands. The situation there was very bad, with over 30,000 people almost at one point, and now it's down below 20,000. So strangely, I think the Moria camp was almost like the bursting of a bubble of pressure, and now there is a reduction. But where there's an interesting development is that the arrivals on the Western Mediterranean are actually very high, 2,000 a week. Exactly. And this is a quiet, we don't really talk about it, hear about it in the media, but this is a big development in the flows from Morocco and Algeria are now basically the chief sending countries. Now, just to conclude one small point, which is that Tunisia has become a higher sending country than Libya. So the last phase on the Central Med was arrivals from Libya. And what was not well understood in the public debate was they were not Libyans. So most people looked at the war in Libya and then said, aha, these are refugees coming to us from Libya, from the Libyan civil war, because they were thinking in terms of the Syrian civil war. In fact, no Libyans were ever in the boats. It was more a mixed flow, as we call it, of mostly economic migrants using Libya who used to go to Libya to work, but now they can no longer do that. They get on boats and go and come to Europe instead. In that situation, of course, we could not return people to Libya because Libya is not a safe country to go back to. Yeah. But the Tunisian situation is a bit different, and I can go into that in more detail in a minute. So this is kind of the overview. COVID has not destroyed the smuggling business, as some people thought it might do. People are still coming. And on top of the kind of background, the privileged information I have access to, I did think it was quite a stirring image in The Economist over the summer. They published an article saying that one person got off the boat in a sun hat with a little poodle, which shows you that it is a bit more complicated than it's sometimes portrayed. So if people are still coming like that, COVID-19 is not stopping irregular flows. And what it has done is stop the asylum processing to a great degree or slowed it down. So it's increasing the asylum backlog. It has stopped frozen resettlement, almost frozen it, which means we are not resettling refugees to nearly the same degree as before, but there's still a trickle. And finally, I did believe that returns of people who don't have the legal right to stay in Europe would completely have stopped. But in fact, since the summer, they have also slowly restarted to the tune of about 1,500 a month. And that's the overview. I think COVID has not had what COVID has prevented, but we might have in the post, because of the economic catastrophe that COVID is causing all around Europe in our neighbors. COVID had stopped big mass flows. There's no big mass flows at the moment. So there's no crisis in this sense. There is a political standoff, but there is no crisis purely in terms of numbers. But what we might see is next year, the migration crises are always subject to a delayed effect. You get the crisis, then you get the asylum backlog, and then you get another crisis in the future based on things that are building up now, and that is the economic damage caused by COVID.
Yeah. Thanks for that overview, Hugo. And you said that Moria was in a way a bubble that burst. Do you have information on what is going on in Lampedusa? Because you mentioned that so little gets through. In the Netherlands, we don't hear much about the increased flows from Tunisians and from Morocco, Algeria. It doesn't really reach the media. How do you look at the situation at the Italian islands?
Well, the Italian, it's I think what's best for forums like ours is to try and move away from the emotion that characterizes the migration debate and try and look at things that people don't commonly well understand. I can actually understand the Italian concerns very well, even though, let's say, I am Irish, so I share more the Northern European mentality, perhaps. But I can see the Italians it feeds into the politics around the pact. They are having to deal with the phenomenon that they are legally told they cannot stop, and that if anybody leaves their country after arriving in it under EU law, they have to go back there. So they feel trapped. They feel out of good solutions. And the interesting thing about the latest developments with Tunisia are the following. First of all, in the time when we could not send people back to Libya for obvious reasons, well, Tunisia is a source of irregular economic migrants because of the collapse of the Tunisian tourism industry due to COVID-19. Nobody is going to visit the absolutely amazing Roman and other heritages of Tunisia, and the country is greatly reliant on this business. As a result, people are getting desperate. There have been, just in September, the Tunisians have sworn in their third government in a year. So there is political instability in North Africa's only democracy. And we have the smuggling phenomenon. Now, what's different here is that we have, first of all, a democracy on the other side with which we can talk.
Exactly.
And second of all, under international legal standards, the Tunisians can be returned to their own country. In fact, under international obligation, are obliged to take their own nationals back. So there is clearly a conversation to be had based around post-COVID reconstruction of the economy and based around winding down what is an unsafe phenomenon for all involved, which is the irregular boat departures. So this makes this quite interesting because it means that, are we going to find an intelligent solution to this issue in partnership with the country most involved, Tunisia? And what contribution can a common European effort make to that? So that would, if you step back from the boat arrivals issue, you will see that it is dominated, perhaps more quietly for the first 5 years, it has dominated certain European politics for the last 10 years. When I started working in 2005, this was a very small phenomenon of a couple of hundred people a year. And by 2014, it had become 170,000 people, 140,000 people a year. So clearly policy choices have affected how big the flows would get. And therefore, if you take a step backwards, you start to get a more strategic picture. I think that Europe is in the middle of finding a solution, permanent solution to the irregular boat arrivals issue, which has been around for a long time.
Indeed. And this relationship with Tunisia might be one of the key ones there to develop the external dimension, and we will turn to that. But that's, I think, very well prepared for later on. Camille, maybe if I can follow up with you, because Hugo discussed the spontaneous arrivals, the irregular migration flows. What has happened to the legal migration flows, that's to say resettlement of refugees and legal migration for work and study? Have they crumbled completely? What have we seen there?
Yes, Monica. So I think as everywhere around the world, what we've seen is that legal migration has been put on hold. Hugo Brady mentioned resettlement. I mean, at least 10,000 refugees have seen their arrivals to Europe cancelled due to COVID. Resettlement quota are now lower. This was expected with the crisis, but I think it's still, it's still seen as a setback compared, to previous engagement of different EU member states. And as for labor migration, I mean, industries that relied heavily on migrant workers have been heavily hit. Speaking, for instance, of the hospitality sector. But now I think what we've also seen is for example, seasonal worker programs. This has been an interesting case study where, while it's both very time sensitive, it is workers in this sector are very needed. And despite, member states trying to mobilize the national workforce with different sorts of incentive, there's still been a need for foreign workers. And I think some member states have tried to create some pathways in the past few months. France, for example, I think in the spring, at the beginning of the summer, were saying they needed at least 200,000 workers. And what we've just seen is, for instance, over the fall, that they've organized with Morocco the arrival of seasonal workers to Corsica, to an island in the south of France, where they set up a protocol so that these workers could come with all the necessary health measures that were deemed necessary. So it has been put on hold, but there's been some measure taken to address these challenges. Maybe I can say a few words on what we can expect in terms of the medium or long-term effect, if you would like.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe two things that I think are sure in terms of the needs and how this mobility might change. What is sure is, and I think Hugo Brady alluded to it, is maybe, the need for protection pathways, that there are some host countries that are already hosting a large number of refugees. And, with the economic crisis that is affecting a number of this country, I'm thinking, for instance, about Lebanon, the need for protection pathways is going to be even more acute. As for it is pretty clear that the health dimension is going to shape even more, how legal pathways were organized in the past. Where maybe there's a bit more uncertainty is on the need in the long term. We all agree there's going to be there's going to be an economic recession in the EU. There's a bit of a question on what this means for some sectors and what this means also for the EU to organize its recovery, and especially, you know, as I think EU member states are trying to think about future investment in sector of the economy that are currently that have huge potential and could benefit from attracting new talents. So that's one need that I think we should not forget, even though we're not all focused on this COVID-19 crisis. And I think maybe just one last point in terms of the how. I mean, we've all seen in the first wave, borders have been closed, but now for the second waves that we're already, I think, living in Europe. Not all economy as close as they were before. I mean, even countries that have imposed national lockdown, some part of the economy are still working. So these may also have an effect on how, how labor migration might still be needed during this time.
Thank you, Camille. Maybe to Willemijn, are there already questions from the audience that are relevant for this context?
Yes, we have a few. It's still relatively calm on the chat, so I would like to invite all participants to throw out all your questions that you might have to the experts we have here in the panel. We have a few questions that concern border management and some security concerns. I think we will address those questions later on further in the panel when we discuss the Migration Pact, the new proposals of the Commission. But I would like to name two questions particularly. Firstly, Mr. Wouter Janssen has asked a question on external processing and whether it would be possible to move EU's borders more outwards, not physically, but open offices in order to process asylum requests there. So maybe the panel experts could reflect on that. And Ms. Heukelinge, she has asked whether the pact offers a long-term solution to the overcrowded camps on the Greek islands, such as Moria, so far.
Okay, maybe what we could do is that Hugo answers the question on the external processing, because he has been close to the European Council where these ideas started, and the Commission has, of course, taken it from there. And we will return to the second question when we discuss with Nanda, because we first have to outline the pact a little bit before we can return to that question, but I will keep it in mind. Thanks. Hugo, maybe you want to come in on the external processing idea,
Sure.
Ellis Island for Europe?
Well, I mean, Ellis Island for Europe is sort of the shape of the Commission's current proposals. But externalization of borders is not what is emphasized on the current proposals. It's a controversial topic, but indeed, what the key to understanding whether it's the appropriate solution is that on the Central Mediterranean, where most people have been coming so far, 80% of those arriving are not considered applicable for protection. So the question for your audience to ponder in their own minds is the nice liberal, middle class, moderate, pro-European approach in Brussels is to say, okay, well, we know that, but we're going to process everybody very quickly. We're going to quickly divide those 80% from the 20%, and then we're going to find a solution for the 20%. And the question there is that, we'll get into this in the later discussion, but the question there is that feasible in the Mediterranean countries, where I never tire of pointing out the legal systems are quite slow in those countries, and I'm not insulting them. It's just that's the reality. The Netherlands might do asylum cases in 8 days or something, but I don't think that is very plausible going on our experience to date. But here's the interesting thing. COVID-19 has sort of shifted the debate on externalization a bit, because even the UN Refugee Agency is doing interviews over Skype on ships, etc. If you set up offices and say, anyone who wants to come to Europe, apply for asylum here, those offices in North Africa or wherever they are will quickly become overrun. So the countries have tried to do that. There have been experiments. Austria, the country that I live in, did something like that. But it was wound down quickly, because they would quickly become a magnet for people trying to access the asylum system as a path to Europe. So the question, I guess, for your audience to ponder is is it the European at the moment the Commission has decided the way to be good European is to give everyone a fair hearing, even if you know a lot of people are not going to qualify. And then another externalization says no, because we know most people are not. It's what we try and do is just prevent the departures in the first place, because otherwise you have legal procedures that go on for 2 years, and you have, I can even answer the second question now. You have more morias because you will have more and more people waiting. But if you believe that we can create a system of super fast legal procedures, then it is plausible. But I would argue not very safe to allow the boat phenomenon to continue.
Okay, Nanda, turning to you with already this prediction from Hugo. If we look at that pact, the proposal for the new grand bargain between the EU member states, what do you consider the main innovation? It has been long awaited for. What are the main innovations to make it work this time?
Well, it would be a bit mean, perhaps, to call it a main innovation, but I think one of the interesting aspects of this set of proposals by the Commission is actually that the Commission has listened to all the member states and has talked to all the member states actively. They went around to all the capitals when that was still possible and did a lot of digital conversations with ministers and with experts, and they've actually tried, I think, to look into the real practical bottlenecks and to find solutions for those practical bottlenecks. One of the most interesting parts of the whole set of proposals is actually the file in which they put all the numbers. Because for, well, one of the first times actually since I've been active on this issue, the Commission has really stated what are the data that they have when it comes to asylum and migration. And they've also been quite daring in saying we don't know everything yet, actually. There's also stuff that we don't know yet. So, so I think this is one of the first kind of set of asylum and migration proposals where the start is at least a Commission trying to solve practical issues as having been well surfaced come to the surface actually during the negotiations on the previous set of proposals. Then when it comes to innovations in legislation, there is of course the screening procedure and the border procedure. So the Commission has looked into, because of what Hugo just mentioned, we already know that 70% as a whole of the asylum applicants are rejected in the EU. So instead of receiving these asylum applicants actually in the asylum procedure, can we not stop them at the external border and distinguish them already there between from the genuine asylum seekers and try to return them already from places at the external border? So for that, they've come up with a screening procedure, which basically means that if a person arrives at EU territory, migrant or an asylum seeker, they will be checked medically, but also security-wise, and we will try to identify them. And from the identification, actually distinguish them into separate categories, meaning that if their nationality has a lower recognition rate of asylum claims, below 20%, then they will go to a closed border procedure. If we think that actually their asylum claim is genuine, they will go to an open asylum procedure. So this is one of the main innovations in legislation. I think the second main innovation
what I felt, Nanda, is that if we want countries at the border to swallow this, we need to link it to that other innovation, isn't it? That is to say that others will also take part of the burden where it comes to dealing with these either refugees or irregular migrants, isn't it?
So this is the second innovation, right? In the sense that, of course, the Commission has tried extensively to look into the main controversial issue of the previous round of negotiations, meaning the balance between responsibility and solidarity. And they have tried to come up with something that is new, which is of course very difficult. And to be very honest, but this is already an answer to the second question, the Commission has failed to square the circle on this balance between responsibility and solidarity. And we cannot blame them for this, because I've had tons of conversations with people on this, and nobody can really come up with the solution to find the right balance between responsibility and solidarity, because there's a group of Central European member states who've always said we do not want mandatory relocation. Then there's a group of mostly southern member states who said we want a guarantee on solidarity, meaning relocation. And the Commission has now come up with forms of solidarity, which says that if a member state is under disproportionate pressure for a longer time, or in case of search and rescue operations in the high seas, or in case of a massive influx, there are different ways for member states to be solidar with other member states, meaning that they can offer support in the form of, again, relocation, but voluntarily, materials, experts, but also return sponsorships. And I think this is the main innovative element in that whole solidarity responsibility mechanism. Because people have written a lot about this already, I think, return sponsorships, and nobody really knows what is the actual meaning of this. How would this work in practice? And a lot of member states have asked that question as well. But the idea is, I think, from the Commission to, at least through this kind of tactical move, open up the discussion a little bit for it to be not only about solidarity when it comes to genuine asylum seekers and refugees, but also solidarity on returnees. Because as Hugo just mentioned, I mean, the biggest group is actually not genuine asylum seekers and refugees, but the biggest group is actually people who need to return according to a rejected asylum claim. So there needs to be solidarity on this kind of pressure as well. So this is, I think, the second element. And then the third element, and that's actually important for the third group of member states, which is more the northern Western European member states, the destination member states, so you will, is an instrument to tackle secondary migration. And what the Commission has come up with is that this screening procedure, which should be applied at the external border, could also be applied to people who are already at EU territory, for example, Austria, a member state without external borders, encountering an asylum seeker who is not registered yet. They can also apply the screening procedure to this person, meaning that they can kind of legally pretend that this person is arriving at EU territory because this person has not been registered in any database yet. Yeah. So that's like the third innovative instrument that the Commission has put in their proposals.
Yeah, I think it is a big step to say solidarity remains the principle. Also, to make this agreement sustainable in all member states, especially in the countries that will relocate refugees to their territory eventually. They need the commitment of the member states who do not want it, in terms of, yes, we will be solidarious in another form at least, that you just cannot just simply buy it off. I think that is key to this pact. How do you look at what Hugo signaled, the capacity of the member states? Imagine that we would have this deal, that we would have this up and running. Imagine we are going fast forward 3 years. What will happen at the border? Will we see new Morias? Because the number of arrivals, the lack of capacity to do it within a couple of days. What is your assessment? So,
in order to avoid new Morias, it never works to look at just one element of the entire system. So basically, you would need to make progress in the coming years on, first of all, return. Because if you have 70% or 80% rejections, these people need to be returned quickly. So there needs to be an outlook on return. Yeah. And in order for us to improve return, which I think is the one thing that all leaders of member states agree on, that we need to improve return, reinforce return, that keeps coming up, is actually these partnerships everybody has been talking about with third countries. So this now really needs to work. And the Commission will propose in 2 weeks' time a proposal on how to use the new visa code, for example, which contains Article 25 bis, which actually says that there will be a distinction between the third countries on whether they cooperate with the EU on return or not. And depending on that, we will make steps on visa policy, making it more difficult or actually facilitate more visas. So I think not only this process, but also the process of the Commission going out there, visiting Tunisia, visiting Algeria, Morocco, etc., together with the main member states who have already a profound relationship with these third countries, is one of the key issues that we need to improve in order to be able to avoid Morias when this legislation actually kicks in. And then secondly, Hugo already mentioned slow legal systems. Indeed, I mean, the one thing that you need as a member state is quick procedures. And that sounds really easy, but behind a quick asylum procedure, there's an enormous capacity of asylum experts, but also border experts, return experts, judges. And then you also need not only the capacity, but for all these actors to cooperate smoothly and quickly with each other. And that takes time.
Yeah.
And money, by the way.
Yeah. So you rightly connected it with the big bet and on returns, like Hugo has called it in one of his assessments of the pact, and the need to link it to the external dimension. Hugo, maybe you want to come in here and to say something on that external strategy that will be necessary.
Yes, I mean, just to clarify, the goal of the pact is certainly to end people smuggling in the Mediterranean. So the Commission's eventual goal of all of these things together is that there won't be a big problem with solidarity, because there will be no so-called pull factor. So in other words, our screening and returns and relationships with third countries will work so well, be so effective, that the smuggling industry will be disincentivized and disempowered, and we will no longer be at the mercy of basically their decision to push boats out into the Mediterranean. Mm-hmm. Now, why I find that, by the way, can I just say, I think the Commission's proposals, also like Nanda, represents an immense intellectual step forward.
Exactly.
The Juncker proposals, in my mind, Juncker was a good man, but in my mind, his proposals were all heart and no head. They were dangerous because they were over naive about the phenomenon. I do think the von der Leyen proposals have the heart and have the head. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, they're worthy of serious scrutiny. Absolutely. And I would say implementation under one condition. Solidarity is fine, so long as it actually produces a relief of migratory pressure on the frontline states. Mm-hmm. If we invented a solidarity system that only normalized systematic abuse of the asylum system, that would not be an effective policy outcome. Mm-hmm. And the Commission has the bravery. In the past, the Commission only wanted to focus on the nice bits of migration and left the hard stuff to the member states, the nasty stuff. And unfortunately, both are involved, and the von der Leyen Commission has more credibility in this because they acknowledge that. So they say, okay, we hear you. It's not just all motherhood and apple pie. We're willing to create a true border and immigration system for the Union, and we're willing to take the responsibility that comes with that. I was very impressed with this. Where I was a little bit more worried is on the return side, because the Union's returns rate is currently below 40%. And the Commission has set itself the goal of getting those returns up to 70%. Exactly. But that almost exists nowhere in the world. And the EU is already quite a weak governing structure. Now, the EU is more impressive than it looks to the naked eye. There's always more going on than the public or even analysts realize. It does work intransparently, but to a degree, to get anything done in migration, you can't. The subject is so emotional, you can't do it wide open in public. After all, if we are going to engage the countries, our neighbors around us, I'm from Ireland, and even when every now and then, every couple of years, the US immigration ministry tried to make a point by sending some irregular Irish migrants home. And even in the relatively wealthy Ireland of the 1990s, this was hugely embarrassing for the Irish government. So the politics of return are so difficult that I find if we are basing our ideas, the future of European migration policy on super duper fast legal processes, in the South, and very, very effective returns, I just think there are two very optimistic assumptions that I would not bet money on, for example. That it's very difficult to get those two things correctly. And the reason why in the last migration crisis, I mean, everyone said, where's the European solution? Europe had no experience in the migration area. Europe was largely a trade and internal market orientated body, environmental regulations, things like that. But Europe has never had an interior ministry that runs things and is responsible for the borders. But we're moving into that direction now. We have a European border guard, as you said at the beginning. So Europe is slowly getting executive in this area. A very interesting question, I know Clingendael is doing a lot of work on it, is the future governance of the Schengen area. Because the future governance of the Schengen area is like the future governance of the Eurozone. We have a very decentralized system, which everybody likes because we all keep our freedom, but also keep the benefits of openness. And there are some difficult decisions to be made. You see it in COVID about how to coordinate. When things get really serious, we don't trust Brussels enough because it's not mature enough as a governing entity. And in fairness to the von der Leyen Commission, again, they had the maturity to say, yes, you're right. You are primarily responsible for your citizens' safety. We can't guarantee that. So we're not going to, posture and be pretentious. So I see a great step forward here, but I'm very worried because imagine this, Monica, that the EU always takes time to I know this from working in Tusk cabinet, the EU takes about 3 years to really get into its stride. And unfortunately, we need to see progress in the external aspects of migration by the end of next year at the latest.
I agree, and I'm afraid we lost Camille because I want to move to her because of this super important external dimension and my shared feeling that we cannot wait until the negotiations on the internal grant deal have been ended. But maybe then, in the meantime, Willemijn, are there questions that are related to Nanda's outline of the Migration Pact or relate to Hugo's?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I would like to shed light on 3 questions in particular. One is on the method of decision making when it comes to solidarity. Mr. Jonathan Zeitlin has asked, is it actually possible to reach a solution to the problem of solidarity when unanimous decision making is involved? So maybe we could shed light on whether it's QMV or unanimity. And then Mr. Zeitlin asks, can we actually use some leverage to stimulate this solidarity by linking it to access to the Schengen zone, for example? So is there any type of conditionality involved? Secondly, Mr. Norman Schultz has asked, wow, this is pretty complicated, the things that are proposed. Is there any low-hanging fruit that we can already benefit from on a shorter term? And then my former colleague, respected Clingendael expert Adriaan Schout has asked, what about human rights? Are they sufficiently protected in the package that has been proposed?
Well, thanks so much, Willemijn. Very salient questions. Nanda, do you want to come in first?
Yes, no problem. When it comes to solidarity, I think we, in parallel of these negotiations on more the kind of theoretical solidarity whenever there's a crisis situation and how do we then distribute the burden, we should actually take a look at what kind of solidarity is already out there. I think the problem is that we focus too much on this high political discussion on solidarity and the concept of it, whereas actually when you look at the past like 2 to 3 years, there is a lot more bilateral and multilateral solidarity between member states. When you look at what has happened to Greece, for example, I mean, there's a lot of solidarity from the EU to Greece, but also from member states to Greece. There's a lot of EU funding, there's a lot of agencies, there is IOM, there is UNHCR being active. But there is also examples of Poland actually recently sending 150 mobile units to Greece to help them. There is the Netherlands setting up a guardianship system together with Greece in Greece. So I think we should kind of stop only looking at solidarity at the highest political level, where indeed some member states would like to maintain unanimity as the decision-making tool instead of QMV, but also look at the solidarity which is actually taking place in practice, which I think is much more hopeful and beneficial on the ground. Then when it comes to low-hanging fruit, I already mentioned the agencies. The German presidency is trying, for example, to already get an agreement on the mandate for the new EUAA, so for the asylum agency, because their work has expanded tremendously over the past 3 years. So they are actually handling 70 to 90% of the asylum applications in member states such as Cyprus and Malta, but also are supporting Greece to a large extent with their asylum system. They have supported Italy with their backlog when it comes to Dublin, and even Spain has now asked them for help when it comes to their reception system. So I think that the EUAA mandate would actually be, it would be beneficial to have an agreement on that already now. But of course, this would mean that some member states need to let go of their political ambition of keeping this as a pact and only being able to agree on every element when they have the guarantee on the whole structure. Yeah. So this is actually a delicate negotiation. Well, this demands a lot of negotiation skills from the German presidency and a lot of pressure from the Commission, I would say.
Speaking of pressure, Hugo, how do you look at Schengen as a pressure instrument? The question of Jonathan Seitlin, access to Schengen, is that something that we can use in the negotiations, or should we stay away from it?
Well, this is important because I think there is this feeling, especially in Western Europe, that it's those nasty Central and Eastern Europeans, and if we could just outvote them or kick them out of Schengen, on the happy day after that, we'll have a great EU migration policy. And I'm sorry to tell you that view is emotional and inaccurate. The Central and Eastern Europeans have been a part of Schengen for over a decade. They have never been a cause of a problem inside the Schengen structure. So we would be kicking them out of Schengen to punish them for something they haven't done yet.
Making their own mini Schengen, by the way.
Well, I mean, all you would be doing then is sheltering them from secondary movements from the Mediterranean countries. In fact, that would be against the Netherlands' national interests. I'm not saying this to get argumentative. I'm just saying that there is this idea that it's all the fault of Poland and Hungary, and I make no comment on the politics in those countries. But if you're looking at the flows and the figures, the answer is that they are not the biggest opponents of Dublin reform. The biggest opponents of Dublin reform has always been Italy. Italy is the country most concerned. Italy has the country with the most votes. If you want to change the system, you have to get Italy on board. Italy is the golden key. Italy actually allied with the V4 to block the Juncker reforms because of the screening proposals in those reforms. So I would beg for a more educated debate. I know everybody wants to punish Poland and Hungary so bad, but the truth is they have never been a source of issue in Schengen. We located Frontex in Warsaw precisely because everybody was looking at that 1,000 kilometer border on eastern Poland and thought that would be the future problem. And that's why we located Frontex there instead of Italy, for example. But then the issue turned out to be the boat phenomenon in the Mediterranean. That turned out to be the true crisis-causing element in Schengen. And also in Greece, of course, which is the only Schengen country that doesn't join another Schengen member. And if if Bulgaria and Romania were to join Schengen, for example, this would create a whole new dynamic inside the Schengen area. So I counsel against this desire to if we got to the very end of this negotiation, and please don't forget that the European Parliament also is a player here. Nanda set out the structure beautifully of it's the Mediterranean countries, it's the Central and Eastern Europeans, and it's the Western Europeans. But there's a fourth player, and that's the European Parliament and the European institutions, which are very pro-migration, obviously. But I would personally, I have sympathy with the question about this is all very complicated. I have an urge also to simplify, and I would gladly accept a doubling of Europe's resettlement. We are the largest resettlers in the world anyway, since Trump cut the American quota. But I would gladly double our resettlement and end the boat people phenomenon. And I think that would be fair in terms of delivering the European Parliament to the table, delivering Italy. And I also have a nice proposal for even delivering the Central and Eastern Europeans, because they need labour migration very bad. Yeah. And our returns can never work unless we have something to offer the third countries.
Exactly. So and now that Camille returned in our panel.
I'll let you hand on to Camille, who has been out of the conversation.
Yeah. Because we lost Camille for a while, and this is exactly the moment to have you back in the discussion. Because we were moving while you were away towards Fortress Europe in our discussion. That's to say, how to discourage smuggling of people, but then we still need to have the gates to this fortress for resettlement and one for legal migration. And since you're the expert there, what do we have on offer? What can we imagine there in terms of innovations to the pact?
Yes, so maybe I think there might be two things where, that are areas that could be consolidated, and maybe there are two areas for innovation, I would say. The consolidation is on labor migration, and I think there is still this question on the added value of the EU in that area. This is member state prerogative. I think what previous research shows, it's like this labor migration pathway exists, there is a need, but EU member states still face difficulties to identify the need of labor market in real time in a comprehensive manner. The administrative process are not always adapted, and I think also in terms of recruitment procedure, the work in third country could be improved. Be it cooperation with public employment agencies in this third country. I think we've seen the work done over the years with a public employment agency in Morocco and Tunisia has started to bear fruits. Like, could similar work be done in other countries where the EU wished to strengthen partnership? Or even with private recruitment agency, where
and we could already start preparing by focusing on institutional capacity of these public employment agencies during the COVID crisis.
Yeah, and I think that's something that could already taken place, and I think this cooperation, can continue. I think. Maybe so that's on the labor side. I think the innovation that's in the pact, that's level as such, is this talent partnership. I think it's very much building on a concept that has been there, this global skill, partnership, but also the pilot that have been launched in 2018. I think there's still a lot to be seen in terms of what this talent partnership will exactly cover, the geography and the number, and also how you communicate this. First, how member states are going to agree to it, and if they're agree to it, if they're going to see an added value to joining forces in this area, and then whether how you communicate this with third countries and work with third countries. So that's maybe for labor migration. And if I can go very quickly on resettlement, I think we've seen progress. I think we all agree in the past 5 years. I think Hugo Brady mentioned that we were now, Europe was in a position to have a leadership position on this matter compared to the US or countries that have traditionally done resettlement. Where the Commission maybe has open door is on private sponsorship, where they've committed to do funding, capacity building, and that might be an area to develop in the next few years, and where there might also be an appetite of member state to use these pathways as a complement to resettlement.
Thanks, Camille. And I also see room for extending the solidarity idea into this external domain. For instance, where it comes to improving the relationship with a country like Ethiopia. When I travel there, I bump into Polish and Hungarian recruiters. And that contributes to a good relationship with the Ethiopian government. If you will have thousands of construction workers coming in for circular migration from Ethiopia to Poland, that makes a difference for the entire union where it comes to negotiations on returns. So I think indeed to zoom out from the focus on just relocation of refugees or asylum seekers to return sponsorship to external relations makes a big difference in the pact that we see now at the table. Maybe to conclude, because with an eye on the clock, what do you expect for the negotiations? Nanda, the German presidency is now trying to achieve guidance. Could you maybe sketch out a little bit what we can expect for the month, maybe years to come?
Well, I think it's indeed important to look at the presidency. So I think one of the lessons learned from the previous round is that it actually matters which presidency. I mean, of course, we all like to think of honest brokers and neutrality, etc. But it does matter. And not only because of having their own positions, but also because of being big or small, in the middle or what have you. German presidency indeed, hopefully, can make some progress with the European Parliament and some of the member states who kind of still are resisting quick political results, quick agreements on some of the files, such as the EUAA that we just mentioned. Others are also thinking about Eurodac, or, for example, resettlement and more legal migration. That would actually be a good idea. Then when it comes to getting guidance, I would actually advise the German presidency against taking this to the European Council. I think this is not the right time to already involve the European Council. Also because some of the member states would indeed happily confirm consensus as a way to take decisions on this file. But to give guidance in the form of a presidency document with all the results of the discussions that have already taken place, albeit digitally now because of COVID, I think that would be a good start for the Portuguese presidency, who is obviously next. And for them to take this file further, but a bit away from the political eye, hopefully, more progress on the more technical level. Then there's the Slovenians. They have geared up, I hear. They are absolutely ready to take this issue and many more because they will have a very busy presidency in the Justice and Home Affairs area. And then there's the French, and that will be interesting because if the file is not finished by then the French presidency will be a key presidency, and we should not, and this is of course always the case when it comes to migration files, we should never exclude the impact of developments such as now unfortunately taking place in France and perhaps also in Vienna, having an impact on the migration file. Unfortunately, this has always been the case, and not only these developments but also the ones that Hugo was just mentioning. Deteriorating economic situation has never been the best moment to discuss migration, for example, because people do tend to link issues, although perhaps in practice they are not really linked. So it will be volatile.
And the external context will also come closer with the economic consequences of the COVID crisis in the neighborhood of Europe. So that might also become an important context factor for the negotiations. I think we have to stop here because we have 1 hour. It's not enough, but I want to thank you so much for participating in this panel. There are not many people like you who know the legal stuff, the nitty-gritty, have followed that for years and can still interact at a strategic level with a wide audience like we had today in this call. So thank you so much for joining. And Adriaan Schout said in the Euro panel, I hope to see you back in 3 months because then we need you again in a panel like this. So I will repeat that concluding remark and thank you all. Okay.